All right. Good to see everyone. It's 9 o'clock. Go ahead and get started. It's good to be back. Appreciate Stan filling in for me. I know that Stan usually attends another one of the classes, maybe Greg's. And so he stepped out and filled in for me last week. Appreciate him doing that. Good to be back. Kristen and I had a good trip. However, ever since we've been back, Kristen hasn't felt well, so we don't know what's going on. She was sick Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, felt better, and then she felt sick this morning. So I don't know what she has or dealing with. So I have the boys this morning, so my thoughts are kind of scattered, but let's try to focus and reel it in. We're going to be in Genesis. I'm going to pick up in chapter 30. 34, 35. I want to work my way to Genesis 49. There is a handout for Genesis 49. And we'll walk through that in just a moment. Talk about when Jacob blesses his sons and he adopts the sons of Joseph, which is why we don't technically have a tribe named Joseph. We do have a tribe of Joseph, but it is represented by his sons Ephraim and Manasseh. And but he'll bless his sons, and we're going to pick up in chapter 35 and just work our way through, just kind of reminding ourselves. I know a lot of this is stuff that we already know, but just reminding ourselves of some of the Hebrew history as we finish the book of Joshua. And Joshua, the book, is Joshua the person leading Israel into the promised land that God had promised way back to Abraham, that he would give his descendants this great land. And it's been a long time coming. And the book of Joshua, they inherit that land. But in the book of Joshua, again, we read just some other details, like we read about Joseph. At the very end of the book, he died, but Israel took his bones because he was not buried in Egypt, and they took his bones. They buried him in the promised land, and we read about a lot of different things happening along the way, so just reminding ourselves some of the details as we go along. And we spent time, we went all the way back to Genesis 12 when we first read about God blessing Abraham because of his faith. And remember, Abraham, from what I understand through my study, is that he came from a pagan family. Even the book of Joshua tells us, Joshua 24, I think, 23 or 24, that Abraham's father was a worshiper of pagan gods, lower G gods. But Abraham came out of that, and God called him to leave his home country, to leave his father and his family. And because of Abraham's faith, and because of Abraham's faith later on with Abraham and Sarah, when God told Abraham to go and offer his only son Isaac, and he's willing to do so. He's willing to do so. He goes and he's prepared to offer Isaac. And so God knew Abraham's heart. He knew the faith that he would exemplify. He knew Abraham. And so he calls Abraham out. He blesses Abraham. And he promises that he will bless his descendants, who will be the Israelites, God's chosen people in the Old Testament. And through that, he will send eventually his son through the line of Judah, the tribe of Judah, and Jesus will be born when the time is right, according to the New Testament. I think that's Galatians 4:4 or something around there, that when the time was right, Christ came. And so through all of this, God is working out his plan of salvation, right? Or his scheme of redemption. Let's call it scheme of redemption. He's working it out. And the time was right. And there's a lot of variables, I think, when the time was right, so that when Jesus died and the gospel is able to be spread throughout the known world at that time, there was a language known as Koine Greek, and it was a very basic language. It wasn't, I think most people spoke Koine Greek or had an understanding of it. And so there was a universal language, there was a road system that made traveling easier. And so really when Jesus died and he ascends into heaven, but he commissions his disciples to go into all the world and preach the gospel, the time was right for all that to happen and to take place. And you have people like Paul, who is so instrumental in the growth of the church and the writing of the New Testament. Paul was used and called out by God to go and to, preach to the Gentiles. And so all of this is working itself out, basically is what I'm trying to say. And God is using Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and the tribes and giving them this land, and the Levites will inherit the priesthood, and Jesus will come through the line of Judah, and all this stuff will work out into the coming of the Savior. So let me going to Genesis 35. Let's pick up there, work our way to Genesis 48 and 49. Again, we started in Genesis 12. We're just highlighting going along. So Genesis 35, let's see, there's Jacob, returns to Bethel. Some of these we're just going to bypass over. Some of them we're going to mention some things that happen in the chapter. So Genesis 35, some big things that happen in Genesis 35. Actually, we really need to back up. Hold on. What am I thinking? Let's back up. Genesis 28. Yeah, we need to back up. All right, Genesis 28. Jacob is the one, his name will be changed to Israel. Jacob, he's the father, the 12 sons. All right, so we're picking up 28, talking about Jacob. Jacob needs a wife, but he is specifically commanded in verse 1. There it is on the screen, or maybe in your Bible. Look, here's his command. Then Isaac called Jacob, blessed him, and charged him, and said to him, "You shall not take a wife from the daughters of Canaan." Why? And we've talked a lot about this concept, but why could he not take a wife from the daughters of the Canaanites? They were pagans, right? They were not to intermingle. They were not to intermarry. They were pagan people, like very pagan. Like, I don't think we can understand. Like, I think when we think of pagan, we think, people that don't believe in God, or an atheist, or someone that's like a good person, but they live differently than us. Like, these pagan people worshiped false gods, probably multiple false gods. They probably, at least some of them, I don't know about all the tribes or the nations, practiced human sacrifices. They did some pretty outlandish, vile rituals to their false gods. So these were pagan people. In fact, if you study the city of Nineveh and how wicked and evil the city of Nineveh was, and perhaps why Jonah, when Jonah was told to go to Nineveh, why he did not want to go to such a city. They're very just wicked people, worshiping these lowercase gods, doing crazy things, human sacrifices, baby sacrifices, all kinds of crazy stuff. So you're not to take from the pagan people, marry into that. Don't let that influence you in your marriage. And so he was to take someone else, not from the Canaanites. So because of that, Jacob goes and he ends up working 7 years, really 14, to marry Rachel and Leah. Now, Rachel was his love. He loved Rachel. So he goes to Laban, and he wants to work 7 years for Rachel. And at the end of the 7 years, Laban throws this curveball and says, well, Leah's actually my oldest daughter, so she needs to marry first. So gives Leah, and then he works another 7 years, right? So we could talk on and on about that. But that's Jacob. He marries Rachel and Leah, not to take a Canaanite wife. Chapter 29, you have, so Jacob journeyed to the land. On his journey, he came to the land of the people on the east and looked and saw a well in the field. So this is where he meets Rachel and he meets Laban. Chapter 29. And then chapter 29, beginning in verse 15. Then Laban said to Jacob, because you are my relative, should you therefore serve me for nothing? Tell me, what should your wages be? Now Laban had 2 daughters. The name of the elder was Leah. The name of the younger was Rachel. All right, jumping down to 31. When the Lord saw that Leah was unloved, he opened her womb, but Rachel was barren. Now remember, Leah is not the one he loves, but she's the one that's able to have children at the moment. Rachel's the one he loved, and she's barren at the moment. And this will come into play, and we won't talk about all of this. We don't have time, but this will come into play why Jacob loved Joseph and gave him a coat of many colors, because he was born he was a son, a child born with Rachel, the wife he loved, right? So, but that doesn't mean he didn't love his other sons. I'm sure he did. What kind of father doesn't love his sons? But he really loved and cherished Rachel and had a son with her, Joseph, and Benjamin. And but going back to the text, verse 32, so Leah conceived and bore a son, and she called his name Reuben. So Reuben's the firstborn. And when we get to Genesis 49, and I'll make sure we get there no matter what, that's when Jacob is dying. He's on his deathbed. He's dying, and he blesses all 12 of his sons. Chapter 48 is when he adopts Ephraim and Manasseh, the sons of Joseph. Right, so Reuben's the firstborn, and that will be mentioned as he goes through the blessings, because the firstborn son is a big deal. He's a pride to the father. So the firstborn son. All right, here is Reuben. Now, Reuben is one of those characters where he has good qualities and bad qualities, and we'll talk about those as we go through. Reuben. All right. For he said, the Lord has surely looked on my affliction. Now, therefore, my husband will love me. Then she conceived again and bore a son and said, behold, the Lord has heard that I am unloved. He has therefore given me this son also. And she called his name Simeon. So we have, the sons being born here. Chapter 30, and when Rachel saw that she bore Jacob no children, Rachel envied her sister and said to Jacob, give me children or else I die. And Jacob's anger was aroused against Rachel, and he said, am I in the place of God, who has withheld from you the fruit of the womb? Let's see, I can't spend time through all of this. Right. Let's see. Jacob will have some sons with a handmaid. Zilpah is one. So in verse 12, and Leah's maid, Zilpah, bore Jacob a second son. I don't know where the first one is. Verse 9, took Zilpah, her maid, and gave her to Jacob as wife. All right, so basically, again, we don't have time to go through all this. We have the sons being born, eventually 12 of them. All right, let's jump forward to we can't pass 30. Chapter 30. That's where Joseph's born. But where is it? 22 and 23 and 24. All right, Genesis 30. So if we were to read all of the text, I mean, you would read all of the sons being born. Verse 22, then God remembered Rachel, and God listened to her and opened her womb. And she conceived and bore a son and said, God has taken away my reproach. So she called his name Joseph and said, the Lord shall add to me another son. And so there is the birth of Joseph. The youngest will be Benjamin, but for time's sake, let's go forward some chapters. Let's jump over to 34, just so that we know that Leah and Jacob had a daughter named Dinah. They had sons. They have 12 sons. Well, Jacob has 12 sons, Leah and Rachel, and I think 2 handmaids. But I gave you a couple of weeks ago, if you have it somewhere, I gave you and I don't know if I have it, but I gave you the family tree of Jacob. So I gave you that family tree and that genealogy showing the wives and Jacob. Anyway, all right. So Dinah, then there was an incident with Dinah where some very terrible things happened. And then there are some sons. I can't remember the 2 sons that revenged what happened to her. Who? Simeon and Levi. They basically convinced the men to be circumcised. And while they were healing, they went in and slaughtered them all. Chapter 35, again, we're highlighting, remembering some major details here as we think about Hebrew history. We have the death of Rachel, chapter 35, verse 16. If we were to continue reading, we'll read about the death of Rachel. Then they journeyed, verse 16, from Bethel, and when there was but a little distance to go to Ephrath, Rachel labored in childbirth, and she had hard labor. Now it came to pass when she was in hard labor that the midwife said to her, do not fear, you will have the son also. And so it was, as her soul was departing, for she died, that she called the name Benoni, but his father called him Benjamin. So Rachel dies in childbirth with Benjamin. Now he'll be the youngest. And the second son born to Rachel. Verse 23, we have the 12 sons listed. We have the 12 sons, and again, these are the 12 tribes. That's what we're trying to lay out here, how we got to the 12 tribes. And so we started with the promise to Abraham. Abraham had a son, Isaac. Isaac had Jacob and Esau. Jacob was blessed over Esau, or took the blessing from Isaac, and Jacob was blessed. And Jacob again went and married Rachel and Leah, had 12 sons, and then they will be blessed by Jacob, his name will be changed to Israel. He will bless them in chapter 49, and we'll get there. And then they will become the 12 tribes, with the exception of Joseph, but he'll be represented again, Ephraim and Manasseh. So that's where we're trying to get to the formation of these tribes. So, verse 23, now the sons of Jacob were 12. The sons of Leah were Reuben, Jacob's firstborn, and Simeon, Levi, Judah, Issachar, and Zebulun. The sons of Rachel were Joseph and Benjamin. The sons of Bilhah, Rachel's maidservant, were Dan, Naphtali. The sons of Zilpah, Leah's maidservant, were Gad and Asher. These were the sons of Jacob, who were born to him in Padan Aram. Then Jacob came to his father Isaac in Mamre, let's see. Again, we can't spend time. Verse 29 is important. 28 and 29. This is chapter 35. 28, now the days of Isaac were 180 years. So Isaac breathed his last and died, and was gathered to his people, being old and full of age, and his sons Esau and Jacob buried him. And so, in one chapter, we have the death of Rachel as she gives birth to Benjamin. We have the death of Isaac, the son of Abraham and Sarah, the father of Jacob. Now, the sons, Esau and Jacob, now they had their differences, and they had their struggles, and they had their frustrations, and tried to kill each other, or Esau tried to kill Jacob, but here they come together, it says, and his sons buried him. Chapter 36, we have more details of the family of Esau. I'm not going to go into that. You would even read about the kingdom of Edom. The Edomites were the descendants of Esau, the Edomites. And then as we continue through chapter 37, we have Joseph's dreams. Now these are the famous dreams that Joseph has as he dreams that he is basically had two dreams. If I remember, stalks of wheat. He was in the middle, and then others were surrounding him, bowed down. Basically, that his brothers would bow down to him, and they became jealous. They envied Joseph. Let's see. Let's see some verses here. I think. All right, so let's just go to 37. Let's pick some verses here. Joseph, verse 2, Joseph being 17 years old. All right, so you know how old he is. You can picture that in your mind. Joseph being 17 years old was feeding the flock with his brothers. All right, we can picture that. Verse 3, now Israel, that's Jacob. Oh, I missed something. No? Yeah. For just a moment, I did miss something. If we go back to chapter 32, chapter 32, 22 and following. So Genesis 32, 22 and following is where Jacob wrestles with God. And touches the socket of his hip. And the socket of Jacob's hip was out of joint as he wrestled with him. And this is where his name is changed. So that's why it's important to know chapter 32. Verse 27, so he said to him, what is your name? He said, Jacob. And he said, your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel. For you have struggled with God and with men and have prevailed. Then Jacob asked, saying, tell me your name, I pray. And he said, why is it that you ask my name? And he blessed him there. And so there we see Israel's name changed. So going back to 37, all right, well, here we have Joseph. His brothers eventually are jealous of him. They plan to kill him. Now, here's something I want to mention about Reuben. Here's his good quality. As all of his brothers, they're jealous of him. They dig a pit. They throw him in the pit. They, at one point, plan to kill him. And it's Reuben, the oldest, who steps up and prevents that from happening and convinces his brothers otherwise. And Reuben planned to eventually rescue his brother and to take him back to his father. So Reuben is the one who is standing up against his brothers as they are doing this to Joseph. But then they end up selling him into slavery to a band of merchants going into Egypt, and they take Joseph to Egypt. And this will play into God's providence. I think you see God's providence here as the famine in the land will be so severe, and Jacob and his sons will have to travel to Egypt, but it's Joseph who's going to be second in command and there to help his family. okay? But all this is playing out. Now, verse 28, chapter 37, 28. Then Midianite traders passed by. So the brothers pulled Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 shekels of silver, and they took Joseph to Egypt. All right, again, if you weren't here at the very beginning of class, we're working our way to Genesis 48, 49, trying to refresh our memory of some history, the formation of the 12 tribes, as we read about the 12 tribes inheriting the land of Canaan in the book of Joshua. So here's Joseph. He's going into Egypt, chapter 39. Now Joseph had been taken down to Egypt, and Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh, captain of the guard, an Egyptian, bought him from the Ishmaelites who had taken him down there. So he was sold to the Ishmaelites, these traders. Now he's sold to Potiphar in Pharaoh's house, and this will put him into a position. Now, because of, is it Potiphar's wife? Pharaoh's wife. I think it's Potiphar's wife. You know, attracted to Joseph, all that goes down. She takes his robe, tries to sleep with him. He runs away. He's thrown into prison. Now, in prison, there's two other men that are there. Remember, there is a butler and a baker, and they're in prison, and they both have dreams. And this is where Joseph, or at least this is where we know that Joseph, with God, is able to interpret dreams. And so the butler, the baker, they have dreams. One is going to die, and one is going to be restored back to Pharaoh and to his service, and that comes true. Verse 41, or chapter 41, Pharaoh now has dreams. So let's see, who was restored as we read? Was it the baker restored or the butler? Let's see, verse 20, now it came to pass on the third day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, that he made a feast for all his servants and lifted up the head of the chief butler and of the chief baker among his servants. Then he restored the chief butler to his butlership again, and he placed the cup in Pharaoh's hand. But he hanged the chief baker, as Joseph had interpreted to them. And so the butler is restored. Now, chapter 41, Pharaoh has dreams, 2 dreams, I believe. And these dreams will be about the famine, the severe famine. 14 years, I think. Was it 14 years of famine? 7 years? 14, I think. At least there will be, let's see, verse 27. And the 7 thin and ugly cows which came up after them are 7 years, and the 7 empty heads blighted by the east wind are 7 years of famine. Verse 30, but after them 7 years of famine will arise. So there's going to be 7 years of plenty and 7 years of famine. So there's 14 years in total here, but 7 of plenty, 7 of famine. And so during the 7 years of plenty, they are to store up. They are to harvest and store up so that they have plenty for the famine. And it's during the famine that Jacob and his sons are going to travel down to Egypt because of the famine, and Joseph's going to be there, right? So all this is going to play out. And then you have chapter 42. Joseph's brothers go to Egypt, and at first they don't, of course, recognize him, and there's so many details we don't have time to go into because I really need to get to chapter 48 and 49, but Joseph recognized them. He puts the cup in the bag of Benjamin, and all this plays out, and they take Benjamin, keep him in Egypt, and they have to go home and tell their father, and so all this, and then Joseph reveals himself. All right. So all of that happens, chapter 43, 44, chapter 46. So chapter 45, Joseph reveals himself to his brothers. Chapter 46 is when they go and they get Israel, or Jacob, but they get Israel and they take him down to Egypt. So chapter 46, verse 1, so Israel took his journey with all that he had, and came to Beersheba and offered sacrifices to the God of his father Isaac. Then God spoke to Israel in the visions of the night and asked, and said, Jacob, Jacob, and he said, Here I am. And so he said, I am God, the God of your father. Do not fear to go down to Egypt, for I will make you a great nation there. I will go down with you to Egypt, and I will also surely bring you up again. And Joseph will put his hand on your eyes. Right? Again, we don't have time to read everything, but we could read and continue reading the journey down to Egypt. All right, let's see. All right, we're almost to 48, so let's stop at 47 for a moment. All right, Genesis 47, verse 1. Then Joseph went and told Pharaoh and said, My father and my brothers, their flocks and their herds, and all that they possess, have come from the land of Canaan. And indeed, they are in the land of Goshen. And so everything that we're going to read in chapter 48 and 49 will take place in the land of Goshen. As Jacob blesses his sons, they're in the land of Goshen. So there we just read it. Verse 2, And he took 5 men from among his brothers and presented them to Pharaoh. Then Pharaoh said to his brothers, What is your occupation? And they said to Pharaoh, Your servants are shepherds. Right? We remember that all the way back when we're introduced to Joseph. Joseph was in the field tending the flocks, a shepherd, right? He said, We are shepherds, both we and also our fathers. And they said to Pharaoh, We have come to dwell in the land because your servants have no pasture for their flock. Again, it's a famine, nothing there. For the famine is severe in the land of Canaan. Now therefore, please let your servants dwell in the land of Goshen. All right, and so all of this will play out. They'll stay in the land of Goshen, obviously because of the influence of Joseph. All right. Let's go to 27, verse 27. Chapter 47, 27. There we go. It's on the screen. I appreciate Steve doing a good job following. So, Israel dwelt in the land of Egypt, in the country of Goshen, and they had possessions there and grew and multiplied exceedingly. Okay? So, it's been a long journey, all right, all the way back to Abraham. And God's promised to Abraham that he will bless Abraham, he'll bless his descendants. We even read specific promises from God that he will give his descendants a great land, this land flowing with milk and honey. And then Abraham and Sarah had Isaac, and Isaac married and had Jacob and Esau, and blessed Jacob, and then Jacob marries Rachel and Leah, right? You see the timeline here, or rather the family tree and everything playing out, and the promise to Abraham, and how God's blessing Abraham, and then we have the 12 tribes now. And so, they're in Goshen, they're in Egypt, and that brings us to chapter 48. Jacob will bless the sons of Joseph. Joseph, is her name mentioned? I cannot remember. Joseph marries an Egyptian woman, and I don't know if her is her name mentioned in Scripture? Yeah, where is it mentioned? Joseph, let's go. I think it's chapter 41. Let's just see what this says. Joseph, Genesis 41, 44. Okay. Yeah, all right. So Genesis 41, 44. Pharaoh also said to Joseph, I am Pharaoh, and without your consent no man will lift his hand or foot in all the land of Egypt. And Pharaoh called Joseph's name Zaphnath Paneah, and he gave him as a wife Asenath, the daughter of Potiphera, priest of On. So Joseph went out over all the land of Egypt. Joseph was 30 years old when he stood before Pharaoh, king of Egypt. And Joseph went out from the presence of Pharaoh and went throughout all the land of Egypt. Now in the 7 plentiful years, right? So, but there we have Pharaoh giving his daughter, or a daughter, I don't think it was his directly, but an Egyptian woman to Joseph as a wife. So then when we get to chapter 48, Joseph has 2 sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. And again, this is just a refresher, because sometimes I think when we look at the 12 tribes and we don't think, and we don't always have to, I'm just saying, like we don't recollect that Joseph was one of the 12 sons, and there's not a tribe Joseph, but technically there is. In actuality, there is. It's just represented with his 2 sons. Now, in Scripture, there's times where it's referred to as the tribe of Joseph, but it's referring to Ephraim and Manasseh. But you may read in Scripture a phrase every now and then. You'll read the phrase tribe of Joseph. Let me give you an example. So I'm going to put a marker here in Genesis 48 and 49. If we jump over to Numbers 13:11, Numbers 13:11. We have it on the screen there. You can look up. There it is. From the tribe of Joseph. That is from the tribe of Manasseh. So notice the writer there, Moses, refers to it as the tribe of Joseph, clarifies that it is the tribe of Manasseh. So there are times where the phrase tribe of Joseph is used, and it could refer to either Ephraim or Manasseh, sometimes both, sometimes one or the other. But Joseph is represented in his sons. Jacob, before he dies, will adopt both the sons, and they will become sons of Israel through adoption, therefore being part of the tribe and the inheritance when it came to the land. Now that, as a father, that's what I would want. I mean, honestly, like, if I was Joseph, hey, take my 2 boys and bless them, right? I'm sure this was a greater blessing for Joseph. I'm sure this was a greater blessing for Joseph, for his sons to be blessed and be 12, 2 of the 12 tribes. Yes, Rick. Mm. Okay. And yeah. And you have to excuse me, Rick. I can only hear part of what you're saying. I think only because you're under the. But you mentioned Reuben, and you mentioned Reuben had done something that he did not receive as much of a blessing, and that's mentioned in chapter 49. And slept with his wife. Okay. 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 Awesome. I appreciate you. Yeah, I don't know if y'all could hear Rick. He mentioned that, and we'll get there. Reuben, I don't remember Genesis what chapter 35 or so. It's somewhere back there. Reuben sleeps with one of his father's wives, and because of that, he does not. So Reuben's the oldest. Reuben's the firstborn. In that culture, and because of that, he would have received double portion of the blessing. He would have been blessed more so than others. But because of his action of, how'd you phrase it? What did it say? Going up to his father's couch. Basically, he slept with one of his father's wives. That blessing was not given to him, but then given to Joseph and through his sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. And again, there's a lot here that I don't know or understand. In fact, I texted my dad yesterday because I was digging and trying to find some answers to questions that I have, and I texted my dad and I said, have you ever done a study just on Ephraim and Manasseh? And he said, no, I never have. And I'm like, well, I can't find anyone else that really has either. So there's a lot of questions that I still have trying to put all this together. However, we have 4 minutes left. So, in chapter 48, we have the two sons of Joseph, and they're mentioned in verse 1. He took his two sons, Ephraim and Manasseh. He's going to take them to Jacob to bless them. Now, of the two, the oldest is Manasseh. However, Jacob is going to intentionally bless the younger Ephraim more than Manasseh. And Jacob, when we read it, Jacob's like, whoa, Dad, no. Manasseh's the oldest, but he blesses them anyway. He swaps hands or something happens here if you read it. And he blesses Ephraim and says that Ephraim's going to be bigger and better and stronger than Manasseh's tribe, and they will be. But we have the two sons of Joseph blessed, adopted by Jacob. Ephraim, the younger, is blessed more than, is going to grow bigger and stronger than the older Manasseh. And then for just 3 minutes, chapter 49. That's the handout that I gave you, or was in the back if you grabbed one. And this was not compiled by me, but someone else that I'm friends with. He went to the Memphis School of Preaching. I think they are full-time missionaries. I don't even remember where. And he put some of these together, and they're free, and I download them. And so he took the time to, if you just go through there, and this is what the details of chapter 49 are, as Jacob blesses his 12 sons. He'll go through each son and bless them. And we don't have time to read it, but chapter 49, verse 1, and Jacob called his sons and said, gather together, that I may tell you what shall befall you in the last days. Now, he will begin with his firstborn. So here it is. Let's just read Reuben, for example. Verse 3, Reuben, you are my firstborn. Now, something else you have to understand, I believe that God is speaking and blessing these 12 through Jacob. So these are not just the words of Jacob, but also God. God is blessing them and predicting the future as they become the tribes and inherit the land. So there's a lot of figurative language here. There's a lot of metaphors here. Some things that we can understand if we dig deeper. There's some things that I don't know if we'll ever understand in some of the language. But he's blessing his sons. Reuben, you are my firstborn, my might, and the beginning of my strength, the excellence of dignity, and the excellence of power, and the excellency of power, unstable as water. Right? So Reuben's unstable. Unstable as water. You shall not excel, because you went up to your father's bed. Then you defiled it. He went up to my couch. All right? And so, Reuben, again, earlier I mentioned to you that Reuben, he had a good quality. He stood up for Joseph. He stood up to his brothers, or stood up for Joseph, stood up to his brothers, prevented Joseph from being killed by his brothers. Probably would have rescued him, taken him back to his father. So had a good quality there. He was the oldest. He saved Joseph's life, as it were, and then he did this with his father's wife. And all right. So again, the handout there, if you go through, it may be in just a sentence or two tell you the blessing that befell upon the 12, going all the way down to Benjamin. And so these are the blessings that Jacob gave his sons, and they were to become the 12 tribes of Israel. And then, as we are out of time, the very last couple of verses in chapter 49 is the death of Israel, the death of Joseph, or Jacob, and Joseph. So Joseph dwelt in Egypt and his father's household, and Joseph lived 110 years. Joseph saw Ephraim's children to the third generation, right? Joseph also died, verse 26. So Joseph died, being 110 years old, and they embalmed him, and he was put in a coffin in Egypt. All right. I wish we could go into more, but again, Hebrew history, it's vast. There's a lot to it, but hope that helped us remember some stuff. All right, there's a lot in the foyer, so I'm going to dismiss. I appreciate your attention. What's up, brother? Not much.